on alpha males. I guess I'm just feeling extra alpha today. This is a second episode recording. Now, you won't probably get them on the same day, but I'm recording two pretty much back to back, trying to get ahead as I would like to spend some time out in the wilderness. And although I'll be able to do some recording out there, hopefully I won't be able to put them out. So I'm trying to get ahead, stagger these episodes. Anyway, you guys probably don't care about that. The Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about being a man the right way with God at the center. Judeo-Christian values. One of those values is have dominion, ruling over your environment, being able to provide for yourself and for those under you, especially those of your own household. For he who does not provide for his own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So one of the ways to provide for your family is just go to the store and buy food. That's probably the number one way that we do that. And that's probably the number one way that I do it, although I like to hunt and forage, and my wife and I go out and look up natural wild edibles, and I hunt and I fish. Probably the number one amount of calories that I consume have been bought at a store. But what if you can't? What if there is no food at the store? What if you can't go to the store? What if stores are no longer a thing? You ought to be able to put food on the table. One of the ways that you can do that is fishing. I did a whole episode on panfish. I've done other episodes on fishing, I believe. Today is going to be a shorter episode on some unconventional ways to think about fishing. Now, we fish today a lot for sport. Getting in your $40,000 bass boat and fishing on top water with a $300 rod and reel. Although it can be a lot of fun, and I love bass fishing. I'm not big on motorboats, but I love bass fishing. Although technically you do catch fish, that's probably not the best way to go about it for survival, for putting meat on the table, for putting fish on the table. What are some ways, if we step back and look at this objectively as a man and our goal is to put food on the table, what are some more unconventional ways in a survival situation, or even on a day-to-day if it's legal, to put food on the table for you and your family? And I've done many of these. I don't mention it in the bio, and I'm probably going to skip the bio today, but my father's a commercial fisherman. His father before him was a commercial fisherman, and I did some growing up. As you can imagine, if your father does that, that's probably one of the first things you're going to do is help out your dad, commercial fishing. There's a lot more ways to catch a fish than a rod and a reel, though I've certainly caught many on a rod and a reel. Jesus' disciples, many of them were fishermen. We're talking about fishermen with nets. A net is another way that you can catch fish. A gill net is primarily what I did growing up, what my father does. Gill net, it's called that because it catches a fish by the gills. You need generally a certain size range for a certain range of fish, although you can catch very big fish or very small fish sometimes. But in general, you want it to match up with the size of the fish. But gill netting, you can float them on the top of the water or sink them to the bottom. But it's basically a long, straight net that you set in the water. The fish swim into it, get stuck, and you come back at a certain time and pull the net out of the water. Floats on the top, sinkers at the bottom, and it's generally a long, straight piece of net, and they can vary widely in the length and the size of the holes in the net and whether they float or sink. There's literally plenty of fishermen do that for a living. My father still does, from what I know. And people do it all around the world, from Italy to very primitive cultures to here in America. It's very effective, even for commercial fishing, let alone just for you feeding yourself and your family. So look into gill netting if you're at all interested in that. Another real primitive way and real common way, and maybe more easily accessible for you as an individual, is cast nets. A cast net, just like you cast a lure out on a rod and reel, a cast net is a net that you throw. And it's literally a big circle net with weights on the ends, and you cast it out into the water. Generally when you come or see a school of fish or in an area where you think there'll be fish. You cast it out and catch the fish and pull it in. It's a more active way of netting fish. And very effective. It can be very effective. We often think of pots as for things like lobster and crab. But you can have fish pots or fish traps. A lot of times you do this for bait fish now, but think about this. If you're doing it for survival, do you really care if you catch 1 5-pound fish or 5 1-pound fish? Not really. In fact, the 5 1-pound fish may be easier to cure and keep. Catching a lot of little small fish in pots with some kind of bait. Fish swim in and they can't swim out. There are many different designs of pots. There's ones you can make yourself. You could literally make one yourself with just sticks and string if you wanted to. But there's commercial ones you might want to buy ahead of time, made out of metal, that are lighter and easier and probably more effective. A lot of times there'll be minnow pots today. But again, you eat a lot of minnows and you get a good decent meal. I like sardines. Hopefully many of you alpha males out there like sardines. What is a sardine if not a minnow? So pots and traps for fish. Also a very primitive way, that native peoples caught fish in traps. Either ones made of rocks or sticks or many other things. Obviously that brings up the idea of spearing or archery fishing, bow fishing. And I'll be fair, I've never done that, mostly because it's generally not legal to do, although I would love to do it. The king salmon hopefully are about to start running here where I am in coastal Oregon on the Rogue River. I would love to spear some of those, but as I understand it, it's illegal. But I'm not saying it's not effective, and if it's legal where you are for whatever species that you want to eat, it's certainly effective. A modern way to do that, and I can't say that I've never done it, is fishing with a shotgun. Shotgun is, as I've touted in other episodes of Gunfighter Life and Alpha Male, the most versatile weapon. You can also shoot fish with it. If you can spear a fish or shoot a fish with an arrow, you can certainly do it with the right size, appropriate shot for the fish, with a fish close to the surface, with a shotgun. Especially, again, in a survival scenario. You're trapped out, in coastal Alaska, and you flipped over your boat, and you have dry shotgun shells, and you need to get food. And there's salmon in a river. Are you not going to shoot the fish? Of course. That's the most logical thing to do. So those, let's call them projectile methods for taking fish. Another one I did as a kid that I hope was legal, it probably was, it's legal in many places in the South and maybe where you are, is a trotline. And a trotline is taking a long piece of thicker line than like fishing string, but a piece of 5/50 cord is a real common line that would work well for this. More common is tarred bank line, Catahoula tarred bank line. Use that a lot in commercial fishing, but it's basically a long, thicker line. You could even use rope if you want to get crazy and catch really big fish. But you have a main line, your trot line, and every couple of feet, and experiment with this depending on your fish density, your species of fish, but you run the main line in a straight line. You got to rig it all up first, obviously, but run it in a straight line, and then off your main line you have smaller lines with your fishing line and your fish hooks. Let's just say, for example, every 6 feet you have 3 foot of fishing line hang down and tied to a swivel. Swivel is important on many species because when they get hooked they tend to spin. And your hook clipped onto there with some bait. And instead of, like you would normally do, throwing a bobber in the water with 1 or 2 hooks on it, you may have a trot line that's 50 feet long with 55 hooks on it. If only 1 out of 10 catches a decent sized fish, that's 5 fish that day. And the cool thing about that is if you're doing survival stuff, you might be off doing something else, clearing brush or collecting firewood, and you don't have to be there. It's a passive way of fishing. You can be doing other things, pulling security, and catching food in the process. So a trot line. Look into those, look into how to make those. Like most other fishing, you can fish from the top or fish from the bottom. You can have it on a float, on a buoy. You can even have it run vertical through the water column to discern where the fish are. And then once you find out where they are, run it from the top or run it from the bottom. But a trot line, kind of a variation on that, is jug fishing. This is like a quintessential poor southern way to fish. You take old 2-liter bottles or old milk jugs, make sure they're watertight. You literally turn those into a big bobber, a big float. You run some thick line, say 5/50 cord or something off of there, and then a little bit of a fishing leader and a fish hook, maybe 1 or 2 hooks per jug, and you throw a couple of those jugs in a pond or in a lake. Now, unless you want to swim out to get them, you need another piece of line to the bank, or if you're going to retrieve them from a boat, then you're probably going to need a gaff, a way to retrieve them, obviously. and you throw, let's say, half a dozen in a pond, depending on the size, or a lake, or something like that. And that's another good way to catch fish to eat. Variation on that is a Limbline, and that's what it sounds like. You take a limb. This works better in creeks, because obviously if you do that with jugs in a river or a creek, they're likely to move and go away. But if you take a limb, a decent springy limb that's big enough that the fish isn't going to break it, you literally just tie a line off of it and tie your leader and your hook off of it and put the bait in the water, so that when the fish bites the bait, they get stuck to that limb. And since limbs generally have a little bit of give to them, that fish gets tired, it wears out, and it just kind of hangs out there until you come and take it off the hook. Limb lining. That's a thing. And even now, even in a not survival situation, it's legal in a lot of places. Go up a little creek in your canoe, or just, wading in the water in the summer months, and make limb lines and hang them. And you take a little piece of ribbon and hang it off the limb so you can actually remember and see, just like trapping with animals. Like running a trap line, instead of running a trap line to trap, let's say, muskrats or beavers or coyotes, you run a limb line. You wade up a little creek and run a bunch of fish hooks to catch a bunch of fish, and you come back later. Hopefully you have enough fish to eat. Anyway, those are a couple of ways that you can catch fish. I'm going to keep this a short episode and probably put it out on a Sunday, on a day I don't normally put out an episode. Recording it beforehand. Not going to do the bio, not going to do a tactical tip of the day, because I feel like this was kind of a series of tactical tips on, let's say, survival fishing. But get your brain thinking. Instead of just a rod and a reel, which I love to fish that way. I plan on doing that right after this podcast on the beautiful, blessed to be on Rogue River. I love doing that, and I have caught plenty of fish like that. But in a survival scenario, take a step back and be circumspect and consider, what's the best way to catch fish for food to eat if my life depends on it, or my family's life depends on it? It's often not with a rod and a reel. That's sport fishing. We're talking today about survival fishing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. If you want to support the podcast, go to goodshepherdtraining.com. I hope you consider becoming a patron. Even if you don't, if you're thinking, I'm an alpha male and I like to drink coffee, I have some pretty cool alpha male coffee cups on there. I also have some pretty cool alpha male shirts on there. I don't often mention those, but I probably should more often. I like doing the podcast thing, but when it comes to entrepreneurship, I'm not really big into marketing. Hopefully you guys support mostly because you believe in the message. But if you want some cool merchandise, we do offer that. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, men, get out there, be strong. Don't just be a fisherman, be a fisher of men, as Jesus called his disciples to be, fishers of men. Follow me and I will make you fishers of men, Jesus said. And just a little bit of, trivia here. That was almost the name of this podcast, a Fisher of Men podcast. But whatever it's called, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.